done of bed nets. So malaria incidence stays up. Crop insurance, we looked at this, then farmers know even in actuarially fair deals that are provided to smallholder farmers, while understanding that there are imperfect markets and they don't have access to capital markets and all of that. Even after accounting for all of that, crop insurance is one of these big conundrums where even when provided with very fair insurance packages, smallholder farmers do not buy insurance unless they're forced to buy policy or it's combined with something else that's compulsory. We actually found in a study, and so this is just a illustration of a study that was done in China, which was of a large World Bank weather insurance program where essentially farmers were provided insurance knowledge. And the brown is the control group. So they just provided very, very basic insurance knowledge. The pink, blues, they're all different intensities of insurance knowledge that are provided to randomly selected groups, right? Insurance knowledge, actually, when you provide insurance knowledge, even though it's supply driven and farmers aren't demanding it, it does change the amount of knowledge that farmers have. That's all very good. What happens when you start to understand, when you start to look at how much they adopt of insurance? Insurance rates are, and I'll show in the next slides, and that unfortunately I don't have a pointer, but the left side bars are showing you purchase of insurance. So yes, farmers will come and show that yes, they have very good knowledge of insurance, understand it exactly as you want them to understand it, and that's a pretty big problem. But they will still not buy insurance. Yeah? And this is uptake in the agricultural insurance market among smallholder farmers in developing countries is close to 30%. If you give other incentives such as cash, for example, it increases to 60%. If you make it compulsory, of course, it's 100%. But what is interesting is that if you provide training to farmers, farmers go, get trained about insurance, their knowledge levels increase, but they still don't change the amount of insurance they buy. Friends of farmers. So farmers attend these training sessions. Neil is a friend of mine. Neil is the farmer who goes to training. I see him and I see him going for the training, I change my behavior. Yeah? That's what changes my behavior, not the fact that Neil may or may not be buying insurance. The fact that Neil is attending training changes my behavior. Yeah? And that's because we trust people that we associate with. And that's one of the other behavioral insights that I'll quickly mention very quickly as well, very soon as well. Okay, so seeing friends attend increases take up almost double. So that's the second insight that we found. Clearly, there's this intention action last mile. So we looked at, in different studies, been doing at advocacy communications, in humanitarian studies, etc., where we've also done an analysis of risks of bias of these programs. To what extent are they biased? And to what extent are they really, the information that is being provided by them, skewed in the direction of the program? Even after all of that, we found a few things that I want to just put out very briefly to take for you to consider. Comparisons help. For all of you who've been involved in the energy space, this is a classic example from the UK, and you see this in Songdo. All of us see this. We have our energy usage, but you also have everyone else's energy usage. I think everyone sees that, of your neighborhood and what the average energy usage is. And that does bring your consumption down because you know what similar people do. Changing norms with briefing entire communities together changes how people behave because that changes norms collectively. But if you do single text messages, for example, if you send out, even if you do mass communications on hoardings, etc., that does not change behavior as much. I'm almost
aware
done.
of time.
Yeah, I'm going to, this is my last 2 or 3 slides, sorry. How you frame choices. If you have a smaller plate, you eat less. Social recognition. In a study in Zambia, we looked at how shopkeepers would help to put out condoms out there. Financial incentives, etc., didn't help. You know what helped? Giving them stars. So if you gave them stars amongst the community that they were working with, that helped to double the amount of condoms that they sold. Last but not least, I think changing the default changes, and this is the organ donation program in the United States, now fairly controversial. People don't like taking off stuff. But if you change the default, that changes their behavior. Gaming changes behavior as well. So make it more fun. This is cigarettes. People in London and around would throw cigarettes on the ground. But if you made it a competition between cigarette stubs for Ronaldo or Messi, that made them put their cigarette stubs inside. So essentially, the argument is that we have to start thinking much more about what changes behavior in this last mile. My last slide is people use advice from trusted people, people that look like them, that have similar values, that have shared goals. Not all together, but at least 1 or 2 of those together. Conclusions. So what can we do in our programs? We can start thinking about the fact that information is clearly not enough and it's not sufficient to be supply driven. We have to think about the last mile. Trials to understand what changes behavior in the last mile are clearly important, and we have to start building these experiments and data into our programs and projects so that we can understand this better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, and also to Joseph for very interesting presentations. And I think what we've done is, what I've liked is that we've used, as Joseph said, one of the big gaps we have is the last mile in climate services, without a doubt. And then Joe's given us some framing choices about how do you change behaviour at the local level. So that's what actually the climate change communities and the early warning has been asking about. I've got a couple of quick observations and then I'll open up to the floor. Just to put it in GCF kind of context, we get a lot of projects at the moment that have climate information services and early warning in them, but they're not connected to, as Joseph said, to the global, regional, national. And this is a big problem because we build a Doppler radar out there, but it's not connected and it's not getting to the people. So we have a real problem here in getting that connection. And this is why this area is really complicated, because it's not like you can just do it at the national level and it will build up. No, you've got to have it coming both ways. And that's why it's so hard, this area. I guess my second point is the fundamentals of climate information for all our projects. And which is why when we're developing what we call the Neil paper to the board, where we're trying to look at what future investments do we need to make our projects more efficient and effective, it's climate information as a kind of across the board, which will inform all our projects, because they're all missing the climate rationale, and we need this climate information. So that's my comment. I'll let Joseph reply to that in a minute, but let's open the floor up for any other questions, clarity, comments. Please introduce yourself as well.
My name is Brian Palm with the Integrity Unit. Just a quick question for Joe, especially on Joe. But, on the slide you had on the uptake of agricultural insurance, it just threw up a theoretical question for me, which is, how do you account for cultural factors, for example? Is information the only variable that changes behavior?
Yeah.
So, I mean, some people have an objection, even on religious basis, to insurance.
Sure. Okay. Sorry, Joe, let's take a few, I think.
Is
that what, that's part 2, is that?
Just very, very, very connected to that. How do you also account for unintended consequences when you try to modify behavior? So you might do one thing, expect to end up with one outcome, but you have another outcome.
Okay, Joe, I'll let you think about that.
Yeah.
Get your thoughts in order. We have a question at the back.
I'm Fola. I'm from KMU, and I was quite happy with what I had Joseph when he was talking about communication as very essential and very important. And I just want to follow up with your own observation. Looking through most of the funding proposals, as that I have reviewed in the past few days, I've noticed that for adaptation projects, it is very essential to actually have a key component being part of climate information services, because that is how we can actually get the desired change and then maybe address the last mile problem. But you tend to see that many, if not at all, some, just very few, will actually incorporate, climate information services. And where they put, some of the indicators do not actually relate to the usage and then the awareness. So I think those two key indicators might need to be, clearly accepted as part of the performance measurement framework that we have recently. It should not be either; it should be ticked as adopted, so that we can actually track how the information that is being assessed is actually impacting on the overall project.
No, thank you. It's a good question, and Joseph, I know he's looking at them all, so he'll answer that. But I will add to that as well. But John, we have next.
I'm John Song from ICT team. I have two questions. First one is that I understand there are lots of trials to develop an integrated assessment model to measure the total cost of climate change, or total cost of disaster, or total cost of carbon, social cost of carbon, I mean. So is there any integrated assessment model for GCF in taking into the consideration into the assessment of all the projects and the assessment of all the results from the project? Second one is about, I don't believe so many such big players like Microsoft, Google, or GE, but I understand they have some technical solutions, like GE has got a Predix platform, IBM has got weather system, which has 300,000 of weather stations around the world. And Microsoft has recently launched a new project that maps all those landscape at the global level to measure the changes of the landscapes from, for example, from the forest to wasteland kind of thing. So, and as well as a CO2 measurement from the satellite, and there is NASA's OCO2 observatory satellites. So is there any chance, or Joseph, do you think there is any opportunity to incorporate all those data all these big players are accumulating into the assessment model or the forecast for us?
Okay, thanks. Let's take those because they're quite in depth. So, Joe, could you take that first question first around the agricultural insurance and the unintended consequences, and then maybe a little bit on what John asked about the integrated model.
Yeah.
And then Joseph, if you could do the second question and also John's question around Microsoft and those private sector as well. That would be great.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, Ibrahim, so on your question was cultural factors and unintended consequences, right? So on cultural factors, the way most of these initial studies are, most of these studies are run, is that they have to be, when you're trying to figure out whether information services, whether communications are working or not, you're using what are called randomized control trials. And randomized control trials are essentially, or you're using what are called also quasi-experimental methods. Both of those will, quasi-experimental methods will mimic what are randomized control trials in that you have a counterfactual. But the counterfactual has to be in the same cultural space as what you're treating. Yeah, and treating is essentially what is getting the program. The important part is that you have to randomly assign them, and that random assignment is very important because you take away the selection bias. As a project implementer, you want to ascribe only the most successful ones to the treatment because you want to see success. So you take away that part, And once you do that, you are taking into consideration cultural factors because you want to make sure that there is what's called balance at the beginning. The two sorts of groups are equal in most other respects, and you can run a lot of tests to then ensure that that's true. Unintended consequences, really good question. Most times when you're doing these sorts of studies, you should be, these are mostly theory-based studies, so you need to have the analog of an ex-ante hypothesis in a sense. And so that ex-ante hypothesis should, on the basis of good formative work, be mapping what you think are unintended consequences. But you're absolutely right, they're going to be unknown unknowns, as Dick Cheney called them, right? So you are not going to be able to map everything. And so that's why doing really good qualitative work on the back of very good quantitative work is going to get you some insights into your unintended consequences. Very quickly, John, on your question of integrated assessment models. So, for example, there's the land cover change framework and assessment model, and that has incorporated a lot of global GIS data to then understand and parameterize how change is taking place. But as we all know, all assessment models, because they're essentially dependent on what's occurred previously, parameterizing them is a big problem. And so the efficacy of the information that we put out is important to gauge because that also has a big consequence for trust. To what extent are you really going to believe these models? And every model comes out with different predictions. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll go straight to Fuller's question on communication. I think it's very true. We've seen a lot of challenges in it, particularly the first proposal that coming. We see a lot of issues with the communication area and integration and mainstream of climate information into the design. So this is something that we are looking at and we are trying to solve that. You will see that a lot of the projects, the proposals, when they come back, they look better because we work with them to bring in those elements and help them to redesign the logical framework, which is so important for tracking progress. And so that is well taken. In terms of the question on the platforms that have been developed by the IT companies and Google, I think it's important to realize that these are made available, most of them freely. If you look at the US particular, they have NCAR, which is a collaboration among universities that provides almost all the tools that we use in climate science. And it's free of charge. That is the beauty of it. So we are able to use this information, even in developing countries, to build systems that are very competitive. So that is being taken into account. But I think it's important also to realize that ICT is actually what is driving climate services. IT revolution has brought a lot of things that we could not do in the past. We could do a lot of stuff, modeling, and combine data in a way that is unimaginable in the past 5 or 10 years ago. So IoT data analytics is the future. In terms of integrated modeling, I've done quite a lot of work looking at multi-sectorial analysis. Because what we realize is that if you look at adaptation, you focus on one sector without combining the feedback loops and then the interactions between the sectors, you seem to have a more adaptation at the end. So integrating them in a way that if you look at agriculture together with, let's say, transport, you are able to take into account the feedbacks, which will be very, very significant. So that is what we intend to build within DCL.
No, thank you. We've got time for 3 very, very quick questions. Don't do multiple ABC to give people a chance. I will just add a little bit to Joseph's answer is that in the projects we're facing a dilemma. The dilemma is we get projects that are full early warning and climate information services. They're fine. They tend to be compact. They're very integrated. They're quite good. You know, they tend to be $10 to $50 million depending on where it is. That's fine. But what we are getting is these other projects which have a kind of plugged on early warning system, but that's not plugged in. So we're telling them, take that out, develop a proposal on its own so it integrates with agriculture, with transport, with everything, rather than just for that particular project, because you're doing climate services for that particular region or sector. It doesn't work. It's not connected. So that's what we're trying to do, just to give you some peace of mind. Jonathan, very quick. I need two others at the back. Yes, thank you, Monica.
I think the Bible of climate finance we are working from all is how do we integrate downscale climatic models with vulnerabilities on the ground. And if we do not have that, we do not move forward. And then we cannot assess what is the incremental cost of climate change. We have to finance through the GCF. When we look that our readiness is not really functioning very well, and that our preparation programs are not great, and project preparation as such is just in a nascent phase, what can we do to really do much better project preparation in terms of climate services integration, understanding vulnerabilities on the ground, and preparing a proper case for GCF financing? That's one question. Second question.
There you go. The power I have over Jonathan. Monica.
Monica Zamilano, I'm 2 weeks visitor at the PSF, doing research for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, looking mostly at adaptation. So I had a question about the last mile. So have you, because when they calculate these cost benefits, they don't see who is running the cost or experiencing the benefit. So how you consider the part of risk allocation of taking an action and the disaster not happening? So who carries that risk? Because that's what we saw in Bangladesh was paralyzing people to wait until the disaster is almost there. So the value risk allocation across the value chain.
Okay, well that's the last two. So I think Joe, is there one more quick one? Very quick? No, okay. Joe and Joseph, could you take both of them? I think they were for both of you really, but mainly Joseph. So if you want to start.
And then I'll go.
Yeah, I think if you remember the slide I showed in terms of the difference in resolution matters a lot. Robustness matters a lot. So in our case, one of the things we have to do is to demand that the climate information that is coming has the robustness at the scale where the project is designed. Because we have done some studies in my past work and demonstrated the slight uncertainty in climate information could lead to a very significant change in terms of the intervention. So in terms of estimating avoided costs and that alone, if your information is robust enough, you could save a lot of money by using good climate information. Yeah. So I think that is what will define much of the work that we do, like making sure investing in right at the source, robust climate information that are fit for purpose and that can demonstrate that our investment will generate the intended results.
Just hold the microphone.
Okay. And then in terms of the value risk calculation, this is quite a complex calculation. That is why I will go for system dynamics, which takes into account the feedback loops. You know, if you are able to capture the feedback loops, then you'll be able to attribute some of this.
Well, what's a feedback loop? What do you mean? What is it?
Feedback loops is that things don't happen on their own. There are interlinkages between systems and processes, and these need to be captured when we are articulating the module. And part of we did a work in Mauritius where we looked at the priority sectors, looked at how they interact with each other, and we were able to demonstrate in terms of past records that if you include feedback loops, you are able to account for a very significant amount of what you will lose if you use other modes. So we have the core systems thinking, where everything is integrated and comprehensive.
Okay, Joe, last one.
Yeah, thank you. So quick word on actually feedback loops. It's one of the reasons that I call this the wicked problem. Yeah, if you look at the work that's been done by Santa Fe and the Complexity Institute, one of the characteristics of wickedness is the fact that you can come up with a solution, but that has its own unintended consequences that you haven't included into your first solution. And so it creates a completely new set of problems. And with climate information and the fact that there are information feedback loops, but also physical and atmospheric feedback loops in the models that we encounter, it becomes even more complex. Okay, so on the 2 questions, so first, raising your question, project preparation and better work at the beginning. I mean, I would really encourage GCF to start doing much better formative work, especially when there are programs that come to us where there is an initial idea to do this kind of work, and Joseph and I have spoken about it in a couple of contexts. It's really important to understand how is the last mile problem being addressed. And not very many of the proposals that come forward address that. Because that's where the rubber is the ground, and it's the vulnerable populations, and it sort of speaks to your question, Monica. Every unit of risk is not equally treated by different sections of populations, right? Unfortunately, in all of the valuation methodologies that we use, we think $1 for me is the same value as the dollar for someone whose level of income is 10 times lesser, which is absolutely incorrect. And so risks are valued with completely faulty methods of valuation, and we have to start changing that. We have to, yeah, I can talk at length about it, but perhaps bilaterally. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you learned something today. I won't summarise, but certainly the topic was very interesting on what works, what doesn't, and why, and I hope you got some take-homes on that. I thought it was very interesting. I'd like to thank our presenters, Joe and Joseph, very much. And for the quality of the discussion, and we'll see you in a month, right, Joe? Next one. Thank you very much.